Hello, my name is Miss Jones. I teach elementary school math and welcome to my channel, Miss Math Jones. Today we're going to be working on our third grade Eureka Module 6, Lesson 7 homework. Our objective for this homework is to create scaled bar graphs. So we're going to be creating bar graphs that have numbers on them on a scale, which means you're going to be counting by either fives, tens, ones, twos. So whatever scale you're counting on, right? You're counting by, that's the scale of our actual graph. So let's get started. Now, let's take a look at number one. Number one says this frequency table shows the favorite subjects of third graders at Cayuga Elementary. So there's a chart there, and it has data in it. Now, the title of this chart, which this is a frequency table because it has numbers, the title is favorite subjects. Now, we have the subjects on one side, math, ELA, history, and science, and then we have the number of student votes. 18 students voted for math, 13 students voted for ELA, 17 students voted for history, and right now we don't know how many students voted for science. Now, let's go on to read underneath our frequency table. It says use the frequency table to color the bar graph. All right, so we're going to use that frequency table to color our bar graph to create the bars. So for math, all right, there were 18 students that voted for math. Now at the bottom of our favorite subjects bar graph, we see math. So what we're going to do is we're going to color all the way up to 18 right above the word math. So you want to color all the way up to 18 just like I did for math. All right. And if you need to pause the video to color that in, go ahead and do so now. Now moving on to ELA. ELA had 13 votes. Now you might be saying, Ms. Jones, the scale of this bar graph is that we're counting by twos. If you look at the side, it starts at 0 and it counts by twos all the way to 20. So how can I show 13 if we're counting by twos? Well, I'll show you. So right above ELA, right, you want to shade up to 12. Now, if you look at it, in between 12 and 14, if you're counting, is the number 13, right? So halfway between 12 and 14 would be the number 13. So all you do is just shade up a little bit more. There you go. And you'll have 13 right there. See, halfway between 12 and 14 is 13. 12, 13, 14. So it's like an invisible number, but you know it's there. Now, the next subject is history. So 17 students voted for history. So again, it's counting by twos. 17's not there. It's not listed, but it's there. 17 would be between what two numbers? That's right, 16 and 18. So you see I shaded all the way up to 16, right? And then I'm just going to shade it a little bit more because 17 will be halfway between 16 and 18. So I'll just shade up a little bit more there. Okay, right there. 17 should be right there. All right. Now, at this point, if you need to pause your video to make sure that you shaded in your bars correctly, go ahead and do so now. Now, if you notice in our frequency table, science has a question mark there. And it has a question mark because they want us to look at the bar graph to figure out how many students voted for science. So if we look at the bar graph, I see the science bar, right? And in order to figure out what number I've shaded up to, you can just trace a line straight across at the top of the bar to figure out where it ends, just like that. And I see that when I draw my line straight across to my scale, so I can see where the number is that it's landing on, I see that it's on 14, which means there were 14 student votes for science. Now, let's look underneath our bar graph, right? Let's look underneath our bar graph. Letter A says, how many students voted for science? Well, like I always say, if you do your work in the beginning, a lot of times you'll have answered the questions that go along with different charts and graphs. So, how many students voted for science? Well, we just answered that question, 14. B says, how many more students voted for math than for science? Now, first of all, I'm going to underline how many more. Anytime I see those three words together, how many more, I know that I need to subtract. And I'm going to write the word subtract there. And you should too. You need to underline how many more and write the word subtract above how many more. Because anytime you see that, you know that you're subtracting. But what am I subtracting? Well, I'll keep reading. How many more students voted for math than for science? I'm comparing math and science. So I'm subtracting the numbers for math and science. Well, since math is the bigger number, then I'm going to write my problem as 18 minus 14. And it also tells me to write a number sentence to show my thinking. So 18 minus 14 equals what? What's 18 minus 14? If you said 4, you're absolutely correct. Now that we've done that, letter B is complete. Let's look at C. C says, which gets more votes? Math and ELA together or history and science together? Which gets more votes? Math and ELA together. See how they said math and ELA together? So that means the first thing I need to do is add math and ELA. I'm going to underline math and ELA together because that means you're putting them together. And I'm going to write the word add there. Now, another word to pay attention to is or. Or. Okay, so circle or because that's important. And then it says history and science together, which means I have to add history and science together. So this is looking like a multi-step problem. I know for sure I have to add math and ELA together, and I have to add history and science together. And then I'm going to have to do something with those two numbers. So let's go ahead and start by adding math and ELA together. So math and ELA, it's 18 plus 13. What's 8 plus 3? That's right, it's 11. So I'm going to put a 1 in the ones place and then carry the other 1 over my tens place. Now, what is 1 plus 1 plus 1? Good. 3. So math and ELA together, the total is 31. Now, I have to add history and science together. So history is 17 and science plus 14. Now, what's 7 plus 4? That's right, it's 11. So I write my 1 in my ones place, and then I carry my other 1 over my tens place. What's 1 plus 1 plus 1? 3. That's right. So my answer there is 31. Well, look at math and ELA together and look at history and science together. But it asks me which one gets more votes. Remember I told you to circle or? You're comparing. Anytime you're comparing, you're finding the difference. Okay? And anytime you find the difference, you subtract. If you're comparing two numbers, you're comparing them to find the difference. And in order to find the difference, then you subtract. So what are you subtracting? 31 minus 31, right? So I have 31 minus 31. Now, of course, 31 minus 31 is what? Zero. Zero. There's no difference. The numbers are the exact same. So which gets more votes? There's zero difference. They get the same amount of votes. There is no difference. 31 and 31, those numbers are the exact same. All right, now, if you need to pause your video to check your work against my screen, go ahead and do so now. All right, now before we start on number 2, I just want to remind you, make sure you try to work this out by yourself before you watch the video, because that way you can tell if you're doing it correctly or incorrectly, if there's something that you might need to work on, okay? So let's get started with number 2. It says this bar graph shows the number of liters of water Skylar uses this month. Now, the title of this bar graph is Liters of Water Skylar Uses. On the left side, you see weeks. Week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4. At the bottom, you see the number of liters. Now, that's your scale. The scale shows that we're counting by tens. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Now, you always want to think, right? If I'm counting by tens, if something lands halfway between one of those tens, what number would that be? All right. Now, think about it. What number is between 0 and 10? If you said 5, you're correct. So I just want you to keep that in mind for when we start answering questions as to what the actual liters of water that you used are when they land between two numbers. All right. Now let's get started with letter A. Letter A says, during which week does Skylar use the most water? So let's look at the bars. Which bar is the longest? That's right, week 4. Week 4 bar is the longest. So that means that she uses the most water during week 4. So in our blank, we're going to write week 4. Now, which week does Skylar use the least amount of water? Which week's bar is the shortest? Right, week 3. So on our blank, we're going to write week 3. Good. Now let's move on to B. B says, how many more? Oh, I see how many more. Keywords. How many more means that we subtract, okay? So make sure you underline that and write subtract, just to remind yourself that when you see those three words together, how many more, you're subtracting, all right? Now, what are we subtracting? Let's reread. How many more liters does Skylar use in week 4 than week 2? Which means we're subtracting week 4 and week 2. So we have to figure out the numbers for week 4 and week 2, because we see bars, all right, but we have to assign numbers to those bars to find out how many liters she used during those weeks. So find the end of your week 4 bar and draw a line straight down like this. All right, that means that she used between 60 and 70. What number would be between 60 and 70? Halfway between 60 and 70. Right, 65. So I'm going to write 65 here, and then I'm going to write 65 below letter B. So it's going to be 65 minus, now I have week 4, now I have to find week 2. So you go up to week 2, and you draw a line starting at the end of the bar straight down to your scale. It should look something like this. That means for week 2, she used 50 liters of water. So I just write my little 50 here and 50 there in my equation. So my number sentence, my equation to figure out how many more liters does Skylar use in week 4 than week 2 is 65 minus 50. So what's 65 minus 50? If you said 15, you are absolutely correct. Now, if you need to pause your video to check your work against mine real quick, go ahead and do so now. Let's take a look at C. C says, write a number sentence to show how many liters of water Skylar uses during weeks 2 and 3 combined. Combined. Think about what combined means. Combine means to put something together. So I want you to underline that word combined, and I want you to write the word add underneath combine, because to combine means to add. What are we adding? Weeks 2 and 3. So we already know that for week 2, she used 50 liters of water. We don't know week 3, so we have to figure that out. So since I already know week 2, I'm going to write 50. And then my addition symbol, 50 plus, right there under letter C. Now I have to find week 3. So to do that, I go back up to my bar graph, I find the end of the bar for week 3, and I draw a line straight down, 40. So my equation is 50 plus 40. What's 50 plus 40? If you said 90, you're absolutely correct. 50 plus 40 equals 90. So that means that Skylar used 90 liters of water during weeks 2 and 3 combined. Now let's move on to D. How many liters does Skylar use in total? That means all together. How many liters did she use in weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 total, all together? So now we did already figure out week 2. We know week 3. We know week 4. We don't know week 1. So we need to find out how many liters of water she used in week 1. So go back up to your bar graph, find the end of the week 1 bar, and draw a line straight down. Now, that line is between 50 and 60. So what number would be halfway between 50 and 60? That's right, 55. So that means that in week 1, she used 55 liters. Now, I have my numbers for each week. Let's go ahead and create or write our equation right there below D. All right, so I'm going to highlight them in red as we need to write them down, okay? So week 1 was 55. So I'm going to write 55 down there. And make it a little space in between because we have to write our addition symbols, right? Week 2 was 50. So I'm going to write 50. Week 3 was 40. 40. And week 4 was 65. So I'm going to write 65 right there. Now, total means I have to add. So that means my equation is going to be 55 plus 50 plus 40 plus 65 equals, now you should have already done the math before watching the video. If you did your math before watching the video, then you know the answer. And the answer should be 210. Now, if that's not the answer you got, then something was off with your math. So you need to check your work. Again, when you're working out problems with multiple numbers, make sure you complete the math for your equation at least 2 times. I really like to say 3 times because an odd number is always best when checking your work. Just to make sure you get the number at least 2 out of 3 times. Like when you're playing rock, paper, scissors, best 2 out of 3. Same thing. All right, let's move on to E. E says if Skylar uses 60 liters in each of the 4 weeks next month, she will use more, will she use more or less than she uses this month? Show your work. All right, this is a longer question, so I'm going to take it a little bit at a time. I see a comma there, so that seems like a good stopping point. So I'll read it again. If Skylar uses 60 liters in each of the 4 weeks next month, so that means 60 liters a week for 4 weeks. Now, you can either solve that with multiplication and say 60 times 4, or if you don't like to do it that way, you can use repeated addition, and you can just add 60 plus 60 plus 60 plus 60. Now, that's easy, especially if you just count by sixes, right? So if you count by sixes, Then that's 4 sixes, right? So that would be 6, 12, 18, 24, and you just put a 0 in the ones place. So that would be 240. If you added them one by one, 60 plus 60 is 120, plus 60 more is 180, plus 60 more is 240. If you doubled and said 60 plus 60 is 120, and 120 plus 120 is 240, that's fine also. As long as the answer that you arrive at is 240, that's all that matters. Now, we only read to the comma. We only created a math equation for that very first part of the sentence up to the comma, which means we still have the last part of the sentence to worry about. The last part of the sentence says, will she use more or less than she uses this month? So you're comparing. You're comparing next month to this month. Again, when you're comparing two things, you subtract. You're finding the difference. So you're comparing 240 to 210. And you're subtracting because you're trying to figure out will she use more this month or next month. Okay? Now, this month she used 210 liters. Next month, she's going to use 240. When is she going to use more? Okay? Or less? So now we subtract. What's 0 minus 0? 0. And 4 minus 1? 3. 30. So again, the question said, will she use more or less than she uses this month? This month she used 210. Next month she's going to use 240. So that means she will use 30 liters more next month. Now, if you need to pause your video to check your work to make sure that your math matches my math, go ahead and do so now. All right, now let's look at number 3. Number 3 says complete the frequency table below to show the data displayed in the bar graph in problem 2. All we're doing is writing the information from the bar graph into this frequency table. That's it. That is it. And we've already found all the numbers. So all we're doing is writing it in the frequency table. So let's start off with week 1. How many liters did she use in week 1? That's right, 55. And for week 2, how many liters did she use in week 2? That's right, 50. And week 3, how many liters did she use in week 3? That's correct, 40. And for week 4, how many liters did she use in week 4? Good, 65. So here, all we were doing was taking the information from the bar graph and transferring it into the frequency table. That's it. No math involved. We were just copying information in a different format. That's it. Now, if you need to pause your video to make sure that your homework matches my screen, go ahead and do so now. Congratulations. Module 6, Lesson 7 homework is complete. I hope you try to complete it on your own before checking your work using the video. As always, I hope this video has helped you to complete your homework and understand Lesson 7 a little bit better. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night whenever you're watching this video. And with math, be sure to check your work just to make sure that your math is mathing. As always, this is Miss Jones saying bye until next time.